tell the truth,
and
shame the devil. I love being black.
Right.
All right, we got some special guests in the house today. Special guests, but I'm gonna let my partner introduce them. But I want a few more people to come in before we get really started. We got the phone lines open today, and I'm going to put the number up there, and so we can, get it going on. Get it going on. Come on in, people. Come on in. Come on in. Come on. People come on in live, uncut, unedited. I told you guys we'll be talking about, actually, we've labeled it housing justice, but we're going to be talking, it's an umbrella. So a lot of you guys have questions today, and this is the perfect time. We're going to put up numbers. We want to give thanks to Teamwork Englewood.
Teamwork Englewood, thank you for having us yet again.
Yet again.
Yes.
So my partner is going to introduce all of us,
including my partner.
Yeah,
Listen, you already know what it is. We're live, uncut, unedited.
Yeah.
We have Mr. Martin G. Johnson in the building. And we have myself, I'm Vera Giles Norris, but our special guest today, we have Connor in the building as well as Ryan in the building. So today we're going to be talking about, housing concerns, issues, evictions, and, all of that good stuff. So we would like for you to call in, or either, if you can't call in, then at least put your questions in the chats. Is that fair enough? So again, let's just go ahead and kick it right on off. Connor, can you give us introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, where you come from, what you're doing here today. And then once you introduce yourself, we want you to pick right on up Ryan. Okay?
Sure. So I'm Connor Malloy. I'm with an organization called the Law Center for Better Housing. I work on something called Rentervention in the Law Center for Better Housing, which is a chatbot that operates 24/7 and can help tenants better understand their rights and how to actualize their rights.
And I'm Ryan Moran. I am a supervising attorney at the Law Center for Better Housing. I focus more on our client services. So we provide free legal counseling to tenants throughout Cook County, as well as free eviction defense representation in the city of Chicago.
Wow. Free.
Free, okay.
Is that it's free, really free?
Yeah.
Or is it a hidden cost at the end?
No, all of our services are paid for either through government grants or foundations and other donations.
Okay, I like that. So you know what? Let me just kick it off, because when we talk about, and I just want to start off about evictions. Talk to our viewers and tell us just some of the things that, if you're going through an eviction, just some of the things that we would need to know.
I think first and foremost, if you have court paperwork for eviction court, show up. If you don't attend court, there's going to be an eviction order in your absence. And when you come to court now, there is a special program called the Early Resolution Program. So all tenants are able to meet with an attorney, either from our office or other legal aids in the city, to review their case, see if they have defenses, and may qualify for free representation.
And if I could real quick, what Ryan's saying is way different now than what it used to be like when I was a landlord's attorney. Because what used to happen is you'd come to court, I'd want to talk with you, see if you'd want to cut a deal with me. If you weren't willing to play ball with me, I was going to go up in front of the judge, have that trial that day that probably took about 60 or 90 seconds. And 9 times out of 10, I was going to get an eviction order against you. Because you're in my house, and so you're not going to know the rules of the game, how to be able to do this, how to defend yourself, and I was just going to win. So now there are a whole lot of ways to be able to resolve things between the landlord and the tenant, and it really just levels the playing field between the two of them in a lot of ways.
Now, you just said something, so I want you to let the cat out the bag, because you said that there are a whole lot of rules and to be able to know what to do. So can you share like some of those rules as far as the tenant is concerned, just some of the things that a tenant should do, so that if they in court, they could possibly side on their side. And then we're not going to be just on the tenant side. Let's also just tell the landlord some of the things that they need to make sure that they have in place, so that don't rule in the tenant's favor.
Sure. So, right, it's not the people's court. There's rules to the game, and how you talk to the judge, how you talk to the the landlord, and things like that inside there. So when you're presenting evidence and things, you got to be able to know the rules on how to show stuff to the judge. You can't just start handing things up to them. So a lot of folks just start fumbling and they can't get their stories out. They don't know how to ask questions or how to be able to provide responses. It's just the way the systems, right? Like systems output what they're designed to do, And so the system is designed to make sure that only lawyers can participate in this process and do it well. So, right, there's little bits and pieces that, can go for tips and everything, but yeah.
I got a question. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that the most important thing for both landlords and tenants to know is that success in your case begins before it even gets to court. So if you are having condition issues your landlord's not fixing, take photos, do things in writing, have documentation. Don't pay your rent in cash, please. Pay by check, money order. Cash App is even better than actual physical cash. That kind of paper trail is going to help you whether you go to court on your own or if you're looking to get help from us or one of the other legal aid organizations.
Okay, with that, I'm gonna change my question. Now, as I was talking to you earlier, a counselor, that I always tell my people, if you living in a place and the conditions is not great, you got to do two things. You either got to move or pay rent. You have to deduct. You just can't say, hey, I got a rodent problem, so I'm not paying rent.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to call the pest control or something, make sure you have your receipts and deduct that amount on your rent. Most people think that they don't have to pay rent because no running water or something. You have to pay rent. You have to.
You have to pay some rent, right? So for a lot of folks inside of the city of Chicago, there's something called the Chicago Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance. It covers most of the units inside Chicago, and there are a lot of tenant protections, right? You go places upstate, downstate, like in the Wild West and everything, there are no tenant protections. Chicago's got some, Cook County's got some, and other little pockets around the area. But the idea is, if you don't like something inside your home where the landlord's not taking care of this, that, or the other thing, you have remedies available, right? But the number one thing you have to do is you have to be able to first notify the landlord, put the ball in their court to take action. If they don't take action, usually it's within 14 days, then you get to do something.
Okay, next question.
Yeah.
You had to have a receipt that you notify the landlord, right? You don't just verbally, that's where.
Exactly. So what we're not talking about is we're not talking about a phone call. We're not talking about going on the maintenance portal on your property manager's website and stuff like that. So if folks go to the rentervention.com, not only can they create these letters to be able to send their landlords, but it'll also send it for them. So it'll send it by email. It'll send it to you to text your landlord. It'll send it by certified mail and regular mail to be able to have that receipt of getting to your landlord at a certain time and a copy of it. So if ever find yourself in eviction court talking to Ryan and that documentation, it's not just you talking about things, it's you showing things. And that's going to be worth its weight in gold.
Wow. And that's rentervention.com.
Rentervention.com.
You got that in the chats already? Or, okay. You know what? I'm just going to spell it and make sure it's right. It's RENTERVENTION.
That's right.
.com.
Yep.
Okay. So
And
there we go.
people can also text or call 8667-RENTER. And that also brings you into the fold to be able to get help.
Okay. And is that the number that's on here? 866-773-6837?
That's the one.
Okay. So if somebody can put that in the chats, again, that's 866-773-6837 or 866-7
Renter.
Okay. So you know what? Here's the thing, because I want to go back just to slow it down a little bit, because I know that there are a lot of people that say, you know what, I'm dealing with a landlord issue. I've asked him several times to fix this, that, and the third. They don't do it. They don't do it. And you're saying that, okay, you have to have it in writing, that you've let them know that it was a problem. Give them at least the 14 days to fix it. For most issues. And I thought my phone was on silent. And if they don't fix it, then what are you able to do?
Yeah, so there's three things that you can generally do under the RLTO. One is you can do what you're talking about before, that repair and deduct, right? So, you got like a busted window or something, you can go to Home Depot, maybe get a contractor, would be even better, get that repaired. So when you pay rent next month, if your rent is $1,500 a month, it costs you $500 to fix it. You give them the receipt and the proof of payment that you did that thing after that 14-day period and the $1,000 difference, right? The other one is you withhold a portion of your rent, okay? This is the biggie. A lot of people think my landlord's in it to make money. How do I hit him where it hurts? I withhold all of my rent. You're going to find yourself in eviction court right quick. So you have to withhold, and I'll just get legalese for a second, a reasonable amount that like reflects the reduced value of your home. So there's a lot more things that go in your home than that busted window. There are walls, there's a ceiling, all that other stuff, and that adds up to how much you pay every month. So you can only withhold a certain portion every month. So if you got that
Wow.
busted window, I don't know, was that worth $25, $50 off your rent? Maybe. Finally, for big stuff, or if it just seems like every month there's something new and it's small, but it's just kind of hitting fever pitch, you can terminate your lease. So you get 30 days to be able to move out from your property from then.
And you can terminate. Wow.
So I didn't know that you terminated your lease, so I'll help get you. Okay. All right, now, of course, we have in this immigration problem, I would say, a lot of people are going into ban swatting. I want to talk about squatters' rights. So can we go into that a little bit, or?
Yeah, right.
Sure. I mean, when it comes to eviction in court, squatters don't really have rights.
Oh,
Mm.
okay. Woo.
So, if, let's say I'm a landlord and I have an apartment building and I realize somebody has moved into the first floor
Mhm.
and are now squatting in there, I can give them an immediate demand
Okay.
saying, you're not allowed to be here, you need to leave
Mm.
immediately. Unlike someone who is my tenant where I have to give
Right.
more notice depending on the problem. So it's much faster, and there's really nothing that I, as an attorney on the squatter side, could do to defend against
Mm.
them, unless they had some proof that no, actually, I'm really a tenant, and they're just treating me
Right.
like I'm.
Now, I've
squatting.
heard cases like this, which is fraud, where a person posed himself as the landlord,
Yep.
and person give them a first month rent, security, but you know,
Yeah.
I've heard it. So how do you
We
guys
have
handle
that.
that? Yeah.
We have that a lot.
Ooh.
And there are, I won't name any names, but there
Right.
are certain companies that where it seems to happen with a much higher frequency. Unfortunately, those people are, they're in a tough spot,
Mhm.
right? They're not technically a tenant because they didn't have that relationship with the actual landlord.
Mhm.
But they thought they were.
Mm.
They thought they were doing what they needed to do. Usually in those cases, we just negotiate some time to try to get them to move. We try to appeal a bit to the landlord or the landlord's attorney. Like our client's not a squatter in the sense of they broke into this apartment. They paid money. Here's rent receipts. Here's a security deposit receipt. A lease they signed with whoever this person was. So we try to negotiate just some time for them to move.
Okay, now another question real quick. With the squatters, if you call law enforcement, they don't get them out of it's a civil matter and all of that.
A lot of times.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
So
even when
how
you
do
have,
you get a squatter to show up in court? So that's the thing.
I mean, you
that's-
can't get anybody
Right,
you
right.
can't force anybody to show up to
Right.
court. So what you would do is after you serve that immediate demand for possession, you can then go and file an eviction case. And maybe you don't know their name, so you file it against unknown occupants. Or if you have some reason to know their name, you can name them as individuals. And then you have to go through the court process. So you have to have them served. First attempt typically has to be done by the sheriff's
Right.
office. Maybe they get lucky and you get lucky and they serve them when they go out. If the sheriff can't do it, you can ask the court to let you have a special process server do it. And if that doesn't work, then you could do it by what we call posting, which generally means the sheriff posts it at the Daily Center, but then they also mail notice to that place. And then, typically there will be at least 2 court dates. And if at the second court date nobody has shown up, sometimes then the judge will say, okay, here's your eviction order.
Now, let's just say they show up, because if it's someone that really had one of those companies that they thought was legit, and, what was the process? Meaning that they show up, I don't have, you may not necessarily have monies to move at the time. I've moved my entire family into this house thinking that, I'm going to be here for a while. So now what's the process? Because I'm not prepared to move. I don't even have monies to move. I've got my children in school. I'm not in this headspace right now.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you've seen happen, and how would you handle a family in this situation?
I mean, we are fortunate. We have some social workers on staff who, that if we are representing a tenant or, someone who thought they were a tenant in this case, it can usually help try to connect them to some resources. We might identify to you any family you can stay with temporarily. And, we try to work with the landlord's attorney because at the end of the day, I think a lot of landlord's attorneys, especially in those situations, I mean, they know that they're going to get an eviction order eventually, but maybe their client, they're already losing money because they can't rent out the apartment. And then they don't want to pay their landlords, their attorney, thousands of dollars to do an eviction or a trial when maybe if they just wait a month or so, they can get their apartment back.
Okay.
And just like a real something for, and what we're saying, this wasn't just going to be for tenants, right? But for landlords out there, if you're buying a property, right, or you've acquired a property, or sometimes it happens, somebody passes away and you become a landlord overnight, right? The best thing to do is to show up at the property and personally introduce yourself to the tenants there, right? Be prepared to show them documents, like a recorded deed, whatever, and introduce yourself. I'm the new landlord, direct rents to me, stuff like that. That's what I would tell my former clients because there is a lot of this fraud and people just hold on to their money, because they get nervous about this stuff. They hear enough about it. They're hearing about it right now, right? So that scares people.
Okay.
Oh, that's good. I have another question.
Go ahead.
Can you explain cash for keys?
I mean, it's basically exactly what it sounds like.
Okay.
A lot of times I have it where, either the person doesn't have a lease because maybe they were, they rented from a fraudulent landlord, or maybe the property is now in foreclosure, something like that. Or maybe just a new owner comes in and they want to rehab the building, and so they want someone to leave before their lease is actually up. It's usually those kinds of situations. And so we can negotiate time to move, some relocation assistance, cash for keys,
Right.
where, you'll get that money as long as you move by the time that you agreed to.
Wow.
And sometimes it's good too to like Ryan was saying, if you're in eviction court, you're going to have an attorney look over a lot of your documents and your situation. They're also going to give you a better understanding too, if you have any leverage against the landlord, right? Did your landlord engage in retaliation because you complained about conditions and they did something bad at the property? Did your landlord mishandle your security deposit, which has other liabilities associated with it, right? So now you're stacking up money on your end where they have these potential liabilities and say, you can make this all go away for the low price of blank, right? That's a business decision that landlord has to make to be able to say, am I going to throw a bunch of money at this attorney that is probably going to get me an eviction at some point in time, right? But there's a lot of uncertainty in this process. Or do I know I can get this person out in 30 days? I can go get my crew in, repaint the place, get it ready, and I can rent it out that next month, right? That's going to be that certainty is worth something to the landlord.
Now, this may be a little bit off track, and if so, we'll jump back on. But what about HOAs? Up.
Yeah.
When you're in a condo, as a condo owner, as opposed to a tenant renting someone's condo, a lot of those rights that we were talking about with condition issues and things like that, they don't apply. You still have to pay your assessments every month, even if the association is not fixing things. Because we do, as part of that early resolution program I mentioned at the beginning, our office will meet with condo owners who are in eviction court because they didn't pay their assessments. And, a lot of times all we can do is try to help maybe negotiate a payment plan so they can get caught up. There's not really those kinds of defenses available.
At all. I mean, it's like the HOA is in a world
Oh, yeah.
of their own.
I used to be my HOA's president for nearly a decade, and I can tell you, you wield phenomenal cosmic power, right? Like it's just the way the law goes. You're your little entity, right? And so you can go in there, you can do all sorts of awfulness to people, and you're almost untouchable.
Wow.
I have another question too. Now, when it comes to eviction, now you have some people have judgment and eviction. Tell us the difference? Is it the same or?
So if you are in court generally for non-payment of rent,
Right.
the court can enter an eviction order,
Mhm.
meaning that, and usually the judge will say it is quote unquote stayed for a period of time, usually 1 week to maybe 1 month if there's particular circumstances, what that means is the sheriff can't come out before that week or month or whatever period is up. But then the sheriff will come out to your home and make you leave, and have the landlord or property manager change the locks.
Because I had one time, I went myself, it was years ago, I stayed in South Shore, and I had got evicted, but they didn't want no money, so it wasn't.
Sometimes they don't file for the money,
Mhm.
and that could be for a couple of things. They have to pay more court costs if they are requesting money. They may know that if you've fallen behind on rent, you probably can't afford to pay that anyway. So what's the point in trying to get it? Why don't you save your money? Because they have even if they don't get a money judgment saying, okay, you owe $5,000 in rent, they still can try to collect it in other ways. They can report it as bad debt on your credit. They can sell it to a collection agency, things like that.
And like another reason why I'm going to come across as like a real bad guy, right? But another reason why sometimes you wouldn't put money on the complaint against a tenant is you could go into court and say, Your Honor, all I'm looking to do is get my client's property back. We don't care about the money, Your Honor. And then we look like the good guy, right? I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm just trying to get my client or something back. And the judge is going to be sympathetic to that. So that's what I would do a lot of times. Because the money, it's not going to be collectible against most people anyway. And if you collect against people, right, and I do a wage garnishment on your check, if you're working a minimum wage job, it'll probably take like 100 lifetimes for my client ever to recoup that money. So why even bother? Yeah. So if I can go in, keep it clean, and go up in front of the judge, and the judge is like, okay, that sounds, yeah, we're going to get him his property back. They're going to do that.
Do that. And I've seen situations where the landlord would not take the money because maybe the tenant had some and it was a third party social affiliate that was paying a certain amount, and the landlord was like, no, we're not going to go through the paperwork, we're not going to wait, and then they refuse. Now, is that like legal, or if the person is doing their best to, they got half the money, they got a outside organization that's willing to help, and the landlord still says no?
So in both the city of Chicago and Cook County, prohibit what we call source of income discrimination in housing. So a landlord can't refuse to rent to you because of whatever your income source is. So if you have a voucher, they can't refuse to rent to you. If you get Social Security disability, or they don't like your job, they can't refuse to rent to you. Child support, all those things. They can if they think that your income isn't enough to cover the rent.
Okay.
But where you get that income from can't be the basis. And so we have argued that that includes rental assistance programs, and I think that there's more guidance than there used to be, at least at the Cook County level, that includes rental assistance programs. But it's not a guarantee that the court will agree.
I know a condo association that my sister had purchased a condo in the south suburb area, real well-known area. And when in the closing, they said if you wish to rent, she had to sign an agreement that she wouldn't rent to people with a voucher. Is that legal?
No. Well, I don't know where she
It's
was.
full force.
Yeah, if that's in, I believe that's in Cook County.
Yeah, that's Cook County.
Yeah, then no, you can't do that.
At least at this point.
At this point,
Yeah.
depending on when it was.
Yeah.
I mean, this is only, I
Yeah.
don't quite remember what
Right.
year it passed, but but yeah, that would be just like you can't refuse to rent to somebody because they have a disability, or because, they're a single mom with kids, or because of their race. You can't refuse to rent to somebody who
And
has a
just
voucher.
housing amendment too.
Yeah, there are also in Cook County limits on how they can hold somebody's criminal record against them when deciding whether or not to rent.
If you look at it like a Craigslist ad or something like that, it says no convicts,
Right.
No
like,
felons.
no felons, like no arrest record.
That's illegal.
That's
illegal.
illegal.
It's illegal.
Because I heard it's even illegal if they ask you before they do the credit check if you
Yeah.
got a criminal
Yeah,
record. That's
yeah, they're
illegal.
supposed to determine that you are otherwise a qualified tenant, so
Right.
that you meet whatever other criteria, that you have sufficient income. If they do a general credit check and require minimum credit score, things like that, they have to do that first. And then they are supposed to notify you, okay, now we're going to look into your background.
Right.
And then once they get your criminal record, They're not allowed to use cases that were dismissed, cases where you were found not guilty, cases where you had what we call a qualifying sentence, which means that you did some sort of special probation or something like that. And, basically, in any cases that were expunged or sealed, any juvenile cases, things like that. The only thing they can use against you is where you've been convicted within the past 3 years. But then they still have to say that there's some connection and why that conviction would make you a victim.
And sex offenses are always relevant.
Yeah, sex offenses are always relevant. Arguably things, certain crimes of violence, arson, property damage might be relevant ones. But, I've seen people, be rejected housing for, really low level
Low level.
offenses.
Wow.
And so that law went into effect in January of 2020, right before the pandemic. So
We're creating, we're creating an app for that on that Rentervention to help people better understand if they are being discriminated against, and to launch something back at their landlord to reconsider their application, provide them alternative housing, or sometimes it sets them up to be able to file a lawsuit against the landlord for the Human Rights Commission.
And again, that app is rentervention.com. Okay, you got the number up there. Okay, so you know what? I'm probably jumping over the deep end again, but I want to jump over to Airbnbs. And if I'm over in the deep end, say, Vera, you're in the deep, you're going too far. But I've seen where people that kind of rent their Airbnb out to someone, and you think that they're going to stay a day or two like they agreed to, and they decide that they don't want to leave. What, are we in the gray, or can we talk about that?
No, I think it's relevant. Yeah.
I haven't had any Airbnb cases.
Mm-hmm.
I've more heard about where the landlord is coming after a tenant for renting out their room.
That was my next question.
One of their bedrooms or something. So, and that's going to depend on the lease. But if it's an Airbnb guest who just refuses to leave, I have not seen that yet, but I don't know, Connor, if you have thoughts.
Like the thing is though, and a lot of the stuff that we talk about, there's where the law is at on something and where like the practical daily life is. You were just talking about before, right? Where if you have a squatter or you have somebody that you don't think is your tenant, you call the CPD. While maybe the Chicago Police Department is good at some things, they're not good a lot of times at showing up and trying to resolve these kinds of disputes. And if they see like that person has, some clothesline on the floor and a sheet on a bed, on a mattress on the floor, they're not going to touch it and they're going to walk away, right?
Mhm.
You're going to have to file an eviction case, go through the many weeks or many months it's going to take to be able to do that. So with the Airbnb stuff, right? Is it going to be unlawful for somebody to overstay their welcome? Is it potentially a breach of contract and all this other stuff? Yeah, but that unlawfulness and a nickel isn't going to get you a cup of coffee in the morning. You're probably going to have to go through a longer drawn out process to be able to remove them.
Because at the end of the day, the law isn't there to prevent problems; it's to address them after the fact. So, I have tenants who are like, well, but what if my landlord does this? What if my landlord does that? And I tell them the landlord's behavior is not within your control. All that's within your control is that you follow what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
You send a 14-day letter and you wait, and then you repair, or you only withhold, a reasonable amount of rent, not your whole month's rent, things like that. That's all you can control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, and I was going to say that was bringing me into my next question, is that if you rent your house or apartment out to someone that decides that they want to rent out to Airbnb, and they got Airbnb people coming in, every few days you got somebody new coming in your house, but they're using this as a way to, income property.
Mhm.
What can you do as a landlord?
So really what you would do as a landlord is you would give that person a 10-day notice. So the 10-day notice, like a 5-day notice for non-payment rent, you got 5 days to pay this amount. If you fail to pay it within 5 days, your lease is terminated. I get to take you to eviction court to kick you out. A 10-day notice says, hey, you violated the lease some other way, right? There was no Airbnb allowed. I didn't allow dogs. And then you got a dog. You got 10 days to get rid of that dog. You got 10 days to stop posting on Airbnb or whatever else. If you fail to do that, I'm going to take you to eviction court. That's really all you got.
Mm. And some people are smart enough not necessarily to post it, but they do word of mouth Airbnb rentals.
Yeah. Because like landlords, they can't put up like barriers to you getting like somebody to take over your lease or something like that, right? Like a subtenancy kind of thing. But that kind of thing, the Airbnb, especially if they don't know who's coming in, there's a potential danger to the property and all that stuff. They can really turn the screws to make something happen. Right?
Okay. Speaking of sublease, how does that work with a person? Now, suppose a person wants to sublease their house, but they're 2 months behind in their rent. So how that works? That's-
Subleases are tricky because people confuse it all the time. I'm not going to bore your listeners with like
Okay.
talking about subleases and subtenancies,
Right.
right? Because like a sublease is really how it works a lot of times is you got your landlord, right? You got your tenant, and here's the relationship between the two. What happens with a sublease sometimes is you get somebody else in that relationship, okay? So if the new person stops paying rent, that original tenant is still on the hook for the money. So it's this love triangle between these folks. The landlord still can do to the stuff to the subtenant if they or the subleasee if they want to do things, but you're always on the hook for it. A subtenant is more like, it's like a hot swap, right? I'm no longer the tenant. I'm out of this relationship. This person takes over my lease. They might take over the remainder of my lease if I had 9 months left on it. They might, get a whole new lease themselves and terminate my lease. But the thing you want to be able to do is, like a lot of times, is see if you can get that clean break because you just don't want to be on the hook for it. And it might, people are just going to stop paying rent or something else. But if you're behind, if you haven't already got a 5-day notice, I don't know what to do for a lot of folks to be able to find a subleasee unless you have a really understanding landlord, which are going to be pretty few and far between.
I have another question too. Let's go. You wasn't here earlier. We were talking off the record, and so I in my community, the Black community, we used to have this thing. Well, they can't put us out in the wintertime. So I want you guys to explain that. Explain.
Yeah, so that is not true.
Okay.
That is a common misunderstanding that we hear. Every year, the sheriff and the local court agree that they will not enforce eviction orders during certain temperatures or certain severe weather conditions. So if the temperature is below 15 degrees for the day, they're not going to go out and enforce those orders. If there's a blizzard, they're not going to go out and enforce those orders. In the summertime, if we have a really extreme heat wave, or if there's, tornado-like weather, they're not going to enforce those orders. But it doesn't matter what day of the year it is or what season it is. They can enforce the
Okay,
order.
another question. When can they physically put you out in your belongings?
They won't put your belongings out.
Okay.
So the sheriff does not do that. I suppose if someone refuses to leave, they could, have them arrested because you're now being told lawfully you have to leave and you're trespassing. But generally speaking, no, they're not gonna, once you leave, the sheriff isn't gonna, remove all your stuff. And usually they'll give you a few moments to gather your necessary thing. So I would say if there's an eviction order against you and the sheriff's going to come out at some point, have your important documentation, medication, all those things ready to go in case they come before you're able.
No, see, this is what I'm hearing, that a lot of landlords are working with people that have been evicted, to come back and get your stuff on this particular
They're
day.
supposed to.
Yeah.
They don't all, but they're supposed to. The landlord's supposed to, again, hold it for a reasonable time. So there's no right line rule. It has to be this many days, that many days. But they're supposed to give you a chance to come back and get your things. Or if they can remove it from your apartment and put it in a safe place to be held until you can come get it.
I got 2 questions. I could take a question from the audience and then someone is asking you to check your mic. But we got a question when it comes to HOAs and Illinois Condominium Property Act, who trumps the other?
So it depends on what part of the Condo Act, right? But like the condo trumps, back to that relationship I was talking about before, you have the condo association, then you have the condo owner, right? And then you have the tenant. The condo association doesn't really have a relationship with the tenant. If the tenant says, this is broken in my home, I used to have tenants do it to me all the time. I was like, I don't have anything to do with it, right? That's your landlord's issue, okay? So that's going to be subject to that like Chicago residential landlord tenant ordinance thing. If something's wrong there, if there's something wrong with the building, then there's like, because right, if we're talking about rats don't just find themselves in one unit inside of a building. They're going to be everywhere. And if the HOA isn't taking care of it, there's little that you as a tenant can do to get them to do stuff for the entire building.
And you know what? Because this HOA thing is just like the HOA president has really put themselves in position to be God.
Yeah.
And it's like, you cannot make me believe that it's nothing that can be done about an HOA president that, especially if it's in the predominantly Hispanic community sometimes, and where sometimes people are afraid to speak out because they want to just go crawl under a rock rather than piss off the HOA president. But when they're doing things that's not legal, they're not taking care of the association, they're not having regular board meetings, and they're, yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, that used to happen in my condo before I took over. Is they would have meetings, they wouldn't announce when their meetings were. They didn't like have money in reserves like they were supposed to. We had like 16 units and we had just a few $1,000s in reserves, right? You can't even paint the hallways for a few $1,000s. So they did all sorts of naughty stuff on not taking care of the property. There are things you can do as owners to be able to push them into it. There's now either like dispute things you can do with the state of Illinois to be able to enforce your rights. But like, not a lot of that is really designed to.
No, because the majority wins. And if you don't have the majority, which in a lot of cases you may not, you stick out like a sore thumb going against the HOA president and then find yourself going up against what I call God itself.
And then if you try to sue them, a lot of times if you lose, you're going to be responsible for the HOA's attorney's fees fighting against you. So why even bother? Yeah.
I got another question. Hope you guys can hear me. With the security deposit, suppose Martin Johnson get evicted. Oh, $3,500 in back rent. Okay, the eviction go across. So what happens to my security deposit?
I mean, assuming that you don't have any damages in the unit, they will keep that security deposit and apply it to your debt. So let's say a tenant is evicted, they owe $3,500, and their security deposit was $1,500. They'll apply that to the $3,500, and now they only owe $2,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why, and there's other problems with the security deposit and why a lot of landlords don't take them now, because it's not even really worth it. Because like you just heard, right? Sometimes it doesn't put a dent in the amount that's owed for a lot of folks. So a lot of landlords are just going to do move-in fees or move-out fees. So they'll kind of nickel and dime you through the process. They don't have to go through the technical stuff of handling a security deposit because, right, like if a landlord doesn't return a security deposit to you within so many days after you leave the property, not counting eviction, like they can be on the hook for 2 times that security deposit for the issues around it, right? So like I've had that happen to my clients before where they've got slammed for not doing like strict rules with security deposit.
They're supposed to put that in an escrow account, right?
Yeah, you're supposed to like put it into an account. You're supposed to identify like the physical address. So if it's in the bank here, right, like you got to give the address, on where you deposited that money, all that stuff. And you got to give interest and interest statements. If you don't do any of that stuff, there's no backing out of it. You can't talk your way out of it. It's like, did it happen or didn't it happen? It's called strict liability. If it happened, it happened, and then you're on the hook for that money. And there are like tenants attorneys out there, this is their bread and butter. They'll file lawsuits against these landlords because they know if they file a lawsuit against the landlord and they win, the landlord has to pay their attorney's fees.
Wow. Whew. It's deep out here, people. So quick question. Have you guys ever had an eviction when it comes to a person that's on Section 8 or low income? How that works, so.
At the organization I worked at before, Law Center for Better Housing, my clients were all either lived in CHA or HUD subsidized properties or had a voucher. So there are some differences, not a ton. So for example, for most tenants who don't have any sort of subsidy, you get a 5-day notice if you're behind in rent. That's true if you are a voucher holder with a private landlord. That's true if you are in a building that is subsidized by HUD. CHA's lease is special because it requires a 14-day, so you get a little bit more time to pay.
Mm.
There are other small differences, but when it comes to just basic eviction court stuff, that's going to be the same process whether you are subsidized or not. It gets more tricky where there are condition issues not being fixed, and because you're paying a reduced rent based on your income already, withholding becomes a little trickier.
Or even terminating.
Yeah, or even terminating, because if you live in a CHA or HUD direct subsidized, so you don't have a voucher, if you leave, you lose that subsidy. You can't take it with you. So, our office doesn't generally provide counseling or representation to folks in subsidies because it's more complex rules. But there are other organizations that do. One of the primary is Legal Aid Chicago.
So
I don't remember their number, but if you Google Legal Aid Chicago, their
Legal
Aid
website will
Chicago.
pop up.
I want to say, so what do you guys say to people that are out there that have judgments, and they come to you guys and say, well, I can't find no one to rent to me. So what's your advice to people that?
I mean, if someone comes to us because they're having a hard time finding housing because of their eviction history, it's hard. Eviction should fall off your credit, your official credit, after 7 years, just like if you have, a bad credit card or something like that. But there's still always public record.
Right.
So any landlord, anybody can go to a courthouse or online and search your name and see any kind of cases that you've had, including eviction cases and what happened in that case. And that's true even because dismissed eviction cases won't show up on your credit, but they're public record. So I've certainly had, landlords and property managers tell me, well, if a case was filed, there must have been a problem, which isn't always true, right? So, there are some avenues to getting that record sealed, meaning hidden from public view.
But that's tough.
It's not easy.
Yeah,
It's not easy. There are some avenues there. So sometimes we'll look at what happened in the case and see if there's a way that we can get it sealed. We will refer them to housing counselors who are able to better connect them with landlords who are more understanding. Ultimately, policy-wise, we're always looking at ways to try to make it easier to seal records, especially old ones. I mean, you got an eviction from, more than 7 years ago, and if it's fallen off your credit because we as a society have decided that after 7 years, debt shouldn't be continuing to follow you along, why should that continue to follow you along?
And then there's tenant screening companies, right?
Right.
So these tenant screening companies, sort of like credit check companies and everything, they go to the courthouse, whatever else, and they gobble up all their data. So they take this little snapshot of you. Let's say you got an eviction filed against you today, all right? Then a month from now, you win against your landlord. Boom, and the case got sealed. But if they collected data from the courthouse tomorrow, it's going to be this little time capsule that you had an eviction, a case against you that's not sealed. So when a landlord is paying that company for their information to say like, hey, look this person up, and they find that, they're not going to see the live court record. They're going to see this time capsule that you had an eviction filed against you and deny you housing because of that.
I mean, credit agencies are supposed to run a new check with every request, but they don't. So if we see something like that, we don't handle those directly, but we can help connect people with resources, other attorneys who handle those kinds of issues.
And I know we kind of wrapping up. I want to do this, but before we wrap, if you got more questions, but if you can, Connor, if you can think of 3 points out of everything that we covered today and speak to a tenant to make sure that they can kind of remember those bullet points. And then Ryan, if you could take 3 points and speak to the landlord and, give them some pointers. I just, that's if we're finished wrapping up, but I just want to do that just in closing to just take those 3 bullet points, for example, for a tenant to make sure that if you're having issues, to document the issues, give it those 14 days, stuff like that. And then as far as a landlord that may be having a situation.
Well, we ain't worried about the landlords.
Well,
Sorry,
Martin,
landlords, but it's the tenants.
well, you know, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
No, it's the law is a lot like medicine, right? You got something wrong, you got like a mole on you or something like that. You're like, I better check that out, right? If you don't, by the time you get to the doctor, you might find out that that went somewhere you didn't want it to go, right? So a lot of times with the law, if you kind of just, there's always the option of doing nothing. You can just sit there and like watch the little rat scurry across your floor, do stuff like that. Have your landlord treat you like garbage. They're harassing you. They're coming into your home whenever they feel like it. All of that is a perfectly valid choice to be able to go through. But if there's something that your landlord is doing that doesn't pass the smell test, like, I don't think they should be able to do that. Go to reintervention.com. If there's something wrong with your home and you don't like the state of your home, you don't think that this is the place that you should be raising your kids in, right? That it's substandard living and this is not how you see your family, go to reintervention.com. If your landlord is giving you an eviction notice or talking about giving an eviction notice, or you just lost your job and you know it's right around the corner, go to reintervention.com. You got to be able to do something early, because the time people like talk to Ryan and her crew, or sometimes when they're talking with me, there's some stuff we can do, right? But like a lot of times, you're talking to people and the sheriff's outside their door ready to remove them from their home. I've had that happen. I've talked with tenants and the sheriff was literally outside. There's nothing.
There's
Yeah.
nothing.
I think for landlords, some important things are to take care of the property, right? Fix things quickly so that your tenants don't have to get to the 14-day letter phase. Because if you keep up your property, that's not going to be an issue. I think another thing is it would probably be worthwhile, even if you can't afford regularly to engage with an attorney, to look out there for to either sit down with an attorney, or there are some other community resources for individual landlords to understand what your responsibilities are, so you don't get in the situation where you're not doing the right thing with the security deposit, or you think that you have the right to do something, but now you find yourself accused of doing a lockout or something like that. And again, documentation is the most important thing for either side.
And rental assistance in court.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's one other thing that's important about going to court for either side, is that right now the state still has COVID relief money that they're using for rental assistance. And so, if you have a tenant that's otherwise been a pretty good tenant, but, like everybody, they fell on a hard time. They were out of work for a short time due to an injury. It might be worth it to do the rental assistance program, help them get caught up, if that's a person who you feel confident is going to be able to pay their rent in the future. Otherwise, you end up with a new tenant who is a question mark.
Yeah.
I got a question. I know it's way over time, people, but I tried to get them to call in. This says, Miss Doris is an 80-year-old senior facing eviction on April the 4th. She has resided at the senior living facility at 3833 West Washington, Chicago, Illinois. Green Council of Garfield II. For the last 15 years or so, she has been experiencing health challenges over the last few years and has been hospitalized many times. Within the last 8 months, property management relocated several seniors to a hotel in Lombard to stay while renovations were being done on the elevator. Per my understanding, she had to pay out of pocket for some of that hotel stay. She was also hospitalized recently and moved to the rehabilitative treatment for an extended period to recover. While in rehabilitation, the government applied her rent subsidy that she received for housing applied to her care. Okay. She fell behind in her rent. The senior facility is now moving to evict her from her apartment. She has resided for 15 years plus. She said she spoke with the 28th Ward Alderman Jason Irvin, and also he showed up for a court hearing, and the judge sided with the senior facility. She has Medicare and Medicaid. So I do not understand how both government entities are not working together, or see that she can pay rent and her monthly $1,000 subsidy is applied to a hospitalization and rehabilitation. She stated that she had until April the 4th to be out of the senior facility, and she has nowhere else to go other than the shelter. So
Oh my God. Oh my God.
that's a lot, people. I'm sorry.
It's a lot. I mean, so we cannot give particularized legal advice.
Oh, right.
For Ms. Doris's situation, I would say that if she hasn't already, should reach out to an agency like Legal Aid Chicago, because they're in a better position to review her, because it sounds like she has a federal subsidy of some sort. I think that, unfortunately, we as a society don't recognize housing as a human right. We treat it as a commodity to be paid for. And so we unfortunately have situations like that a lot where, we have a senior and maybe they're not even in a subsidized property, but they're living on very limited income. And a new landlord comes in and buys their property and wants to increase the rent. Now they can't afford it, but they've lived there for such a long period of time. And we, Chicago is in desperate need of more affordable housing for folks. And so unfortunately that's a social issue and not a legal issue. And so there are certain ways that we can maybe come in some situations and get more time, with the new owner who wants to, evict a senior or something. Maybe they didn't do it right. And so we can get them more time. But there's nothing we can do to force a landlord to keep a tenant long term.
So, but this Miss Doris situation, this is something,
It's
That-
unfortunate, like something that have seen a lot in
Well,
my
a lot of
career.
landlords, it's business. It's nothing
Yeah.
personal. So
Yeah.
they're not operating with feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I understand it from that point. I'm not a business landlord owner, but
No,
I understand it from that point.
And it kind of goes both ways, right? Like I used to represent landlords that would, they'd have a 2-flat and they live on one of the floors, right? And they'd have a tenant that would also maybe this literally happened. The landlord got sick at one point in time. The tenant was taking care of their kids for a little while. They had this very personal relationship. And then when the landlord filed the eviction against them because they were several months behind, they took it personally. How could they, right? Versus the other side of it, where you get these multi-state corporations that own thousands and thousands of units across the city of Chicago. You're just a number on a spreadsheet for them. They can write you off or do whatever else, right? And whether or not they're looking at Ms. Doris like that, I can only say though that there's also social services through the sheriff's department that people can reach out to, especially for folks that have elderly or disabled. They have specialized resources for that to be able to potentially get them more time and help them relocate to some other place. So they're not just at a shelter or out on the street, God forbid.
All right, that's it, people. We'll close it out. We've been on here 53 minutes.
all right.
All right.
You already know what it is.
You already know what it is.
You already know what it is.
What is it?
Live.
Uncut, unedited. Tell the truth
And what?
And do what?
and shame the devil.
I think we did.
I love being black.
All right, thank you guys so much. I want to thank you guys for being patient with us today, asking a lot of questions. And we have most of my base is the Black community. So most of the time we last one informed about a lot of different things. So I'm quite sure that I was cleared up on a lot of things about eviction and when can they put you out and when is the appropriate time. And also one question too.
Sure.
The last question. Now, since the sheriff don't physically put you out, they lock you out and have the landlord change the locks. So it's up to the landlord to get your stuff put out or okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the landlord will be can either leave the stuff there for a reasonable amount of time and let you come back to get it, or can remove it to another location for
Well,
safekeeping.
what if I would just put it outside?
Yeah.
They have to wait a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I used to tell my landlord clients, I was like, don't play with that stuff, right? Because last thing you want is now you got them out, sure, and you think you're closing that chapter of your life, but now you're going to find yourself in small claims court or something else because you damaged their property or you mishandled their property when you're relocated. So just don't play. Just let them come in, do it. You can ask a police officer to do a civil standby. So make sure that the tenant's going in and out. Nobody's like having any conflict with each other. You can do that kind of thing.
So well, suppose if the tenants say, well, I had a Rolex watch in there, it's not in here no more.
I mean, again, you have to have documentation to
Yeah,
prove.
yeah.
So hopefully they save the receipt.
Documentation beats
That's
conversation.
it.
All right, we out of here?
We out of here. All right.
You already know what it is.
Good day, y'all.
Live.